All right. Welcome, everyone, to the October 2021 Community IT Innovators webinar. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the cybersecurity self-assessment. Today, we're going to explore your risk assessment and cybersecurity preparedness options based on our just released cybersecurity self-assessment, which you can find on our website and which we will be sending a link out to shortly. This self-assessment will help nonprofit organizations document their cybersecurity readiness. My name is Johan Hammerstrom, and I'm the CEO of Community IT and the moderator for this webinar series. The slides and recording for today's webinar will be available on our website and YouTube channel later this week. If you're watching on YouTube right now, we encourage you to subscribe to our channel so that you can receive automatic updates when we post new webinar recordings each month. We invite you to use the Q&A panel throughout today's webinar to ask questions, and we will do our best to respond. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about our company. Community IT is a 100% employee-owned company, and our team of 38 staff is dedicated to helping nonprofit organizations advance their missions through the effective use of technology. We're technology experts, and we have been consistently named a top 501 managed services provider by Channel Futures, and it's an honor that we received again for 2020. And now, it's my pleasure to welcome our Chief Technology Officer, cybersecurity expert, and resident thought leader in the area of nonprofit cybersecurity, Matthew Eshelman. Good afternoon, Matt.
Hey, good afternoon, Johan. Thanks for the intro. It's, and I'm thankful for all of you who are joining today. This is October. It's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And so we're bringing this session to you today to talk a little bit about how to go through our cybersecurity self-assessment. And I think more importantly than going through the assessment is understanding the recommendations and making a plan for how your organization can get those plans implemented. So we are going to be talking about a couple things today during our session. So one is just the overview of the cybersecurity landscape. Again, I think it's always good to level set and understand the kind of the IT world that we're operating in. We'll talk about some controls that are identified in the assessment, and then talk about how to prioritize implementation and then engage leadership. I think there's so many different assessment tools out there and surveys and frameworks. And so there's no shortage of knowing what to do. I think the real gap is in implementation and execution. And so we'll talk a little bit about how to pick some things, how to engage your leadership, and how to really move forward with the implementation. So as Johan said, we want this to be a conversation. Please use the chat and the Q&A features. Johan will be moderating that, and we'll be taking questions as they come in the session. So please feel free to go ahead and chat those in so that we can answer any questions that come up as you think about them. So let's first start off by talking a little bit about the cybersecurity landscape. This is the world that we're operating in now, where we see persistent and ongoing brute force attacks on identities. So if you've been following the releases from Microsoft, there have been a number of different threat actors that have been conducting password spray attacks against Office 365. And so this is something that we see in the security systems that we monitor, is that there's just ongoing authentication attempts against any cloud-based system. So again, if you can log into it from the cloud, the bad guys can too, and they're actively doing so and trying to log in. We're also seeing very sophisticated spear phishing attacks being perpetrated, where you may get those emails that look like they're coming from somebody within the organization, or maybe even a partner organization that you work with, and then try to get you to maybe click on a link, share your password, buy a gift card, update some financial information, and they look very convincing. So that's something that we've seen a real increase on in the last year or so. We're also seeing organizations targeted because of the work that they do. So organizations in the think tank and policy space, I think, are particularly targeted right now. We're also seeing attacks against healthcare, even education. So again, Nonprofit organizations don't get to fly under the radar because they're doing good work. Organizations, are kind of targeted because of the work that they're doing. And then finally, we're also seeing attacks targeting vendors. So vendors like managed service providers such as ourselves, because of the access that we have, are our favorite targets of these attackers. And so it's important that as you're working with a vendor, you have a good understanding of the security controls that they have in place to protect your information. It's not all necessarily bad news. The good news is that there are lots of good security tools available to help combat these threat types. You've taken a really good step in terms of coming to the webinar to learn a little bit more. Maybe you've already taken that self-assessment, and so we certainly see a lot more proactive steps from the clients that we work with to asking about how they can implement good security controls at their organization, what steps they need to take. And so I think that's really encouraging. But we know that we still have a lot of work to do. And I think that was judged by the survey results that we saw. I don't think we had very many people that, that had the big smiley face that said, yes, we're doing all that we need to do in the area of cybersecurity protection. So again, there's lots more work to do. And I think there's also a real financial impact to this as well. We see the stat here that breach response for a small to mid-sized business is about $149,000. That's real money. I think the other thing that we've seen in the last 6 months in particular, as it relates to cyber liability insurance renewals, is that those prices are going up. They're going up steeply. And they're also mandating significant cybersecurity controls to be in place to even be considered for a policy. So if you have a renewal coming up, I think you need to be aware that the controls that you may not have had to say yes to, you will now need to be able to say yes to. So I think the cyber insurance business has gotten burned, and so they're reacting to that with increased requirements for controls, and then also raising prices as well. And again, as I I'll reiterate, is that just because you're a nonprofit organization doesn't mean that you get to fly under the radar. So your organization has data that is valuable, and that could be specific information like what's shown here in terms of credit card or customer PII or medical information if you're in that space. But it also could be other financial loss that occurs due to fraud. And so we've seen recent examples of this related to email compromise that turned into wire fraud. So again, updating bank transfer information. We've also seen cases of gift card fraud. And while we haven't been able to find a direct correlation between any compromise on a system that we've maintained, we've also seen a spike in unemployment fraud. And so this is kind of new to me in terms of the fraud associated with unemployment claims, but that's where an employee's identity is stolen somehow. Not necessarily clear how, but then an unemployment claim is filed, and then the state office then reaches out to the employer to confirm the status and then follow up. So this is something that has increased pretty dramatically as part of COVID. And so Angie Barnett, who is the president of the Better Business Bureau of Maryland, Greater Maryland, said that in some estimates, this type of fraud has gone up over 3,000% since the coronavirus pandemic, and catching and prosecuting these criminals is really tough. So I know I've been on the reacting side whenever we have a client say, hey, we were contacted by our state labor department to investigate this claim of unemployment. Can you investigate what happened? And so we're involved in kind of responding to those incidents as well. And it's because of the data that is stolen. Again, it could be from the organization, or it could be other areas where an identity may be stolen, but that really translates into real money, into real financial loss. And I think it's important to understand that these hackers aren't just some genius hacker in the basement that knows 15% of your password that's trying to get into the system, but these are organized criminal enterprises. So again, the cybersecurity adversaries that you face, are examples here, like we see here Fancy Bear. So that kind of got a lot of press as part of the DNC hack back in 2016. Cozy Bear, also a Russian-backed entity that was involved in the SolarWinds hack. And then we have the other adversary here, which is not necessarily a nation state, but more of a criminal enterprise, the ReEvil group that has been responsible or associated with a number of ransomware attacks recently, the Colonial Pipeline, among others, where networks were infected with a crypto virus, all the files were locked, and then a ransom was demanded in order to get that data back. So again, that's something that happens to big companies, but it's also something that happens to small organizations as well. I was talking with a colleague today, and he said that his local newspaper actually was a victim of a crypto attack just in the last week, and it really just crippled their ability to put out a newspaper. And so this is something where no organization is immune from attack. It doesn't matter if you're a Colonial Pipeline or a local print company, a local education, Department of Education, all are vulnerable and susceptible to these types of attacks. So in terms of how we take all this bad news and scary things and turn it into actionable steps for nonprofit organizations to take is really by building a foundation of security policy and awareness. We really try to start with that view of a policy roadmap, educating and training the staff at organization, and then building on top of that with the technology tools that fill in these blue blocks here as well. Once we have our foundation established, then it may be appropriate to add on some additional sophisticated tools to provide that extra layer of protection. And we draw that from what we put out for the past 3 years, which is our nonprofit cybersecurity incident report. So this is a report that we've developed because as a managed service provider, we support over 140 different organizations. We support about over 5,000 users. And so we get a lot of information through our help desk in terms of the types of attacks nonprofits are facing. And we can see over the years that the number of security incidents that we record has really gone up dramatically. So, back in 2018, we recorded 233 incidents. 2019, that number went up to just over 500 incidents. In 2020, that was almost 700 incidents. And so that helps us take a data-driven approach to guide our cybersecurity recommendations. So in addition to the data that we see coming through our service desk, we also use common industry standards such as the NIST Cybersecurity Framework and the Center for Internet Security's V8 controls that if you're a policy wonk, that used to be called, referred to as the 20 critical security controls. Now there's only 18. I think they've actually done a good job in the revision and making it a little bit more applicable to smaller organizations. But again, they provide some good high-level guidance, but I do think that they end up being a little bit overly cumbersome for the smaller and more cloud-centric networks that we see in the small and mid-sized nonprofit clients that we work with. And so applying those big frameworks to your organization just may be a little bit too complicated or not relevant. And so that's why with the assessment that we put out in that survey, it really is a stripped down and focused version so that you can get started on manageable steps to really address the most likely risks to your network. So let's go ahead and take a look at those specific sections in the survey and talk a little bit more about the details and then where you can get started. So so if you can, we'll just go ahead and take a look here. And as I said, we really start with policy. So I think policy, it's maybe not always the most entertaining thing to talk about, but the policy really should form the foundation of your cybersecurity controls. So this provides the framework to make other decisions that layer on top of that. So we have an entire webinar and podcast devoted to this policy elements that you can check out. So Johan will be chatting out the link to that, where I really go into a deep dive on the policy creation process and the details associated with each of those elements. But I will say that, most organizations, and whenever I'm doing consulting engagements with clients, I will say that most organizations do need to refresh this as their IT acceptable use policy. It's likely part of the employee handbook. It was developed a long time ago, and it really isn't reflective of the organization and how they work now in terms of being flexible and cloud centric, as many nonprofit networks are now. I think that was one of the striking things that I noticed in the survey data. Of all the people that have taken the assessment now, only one organization has data on premise, solely on premise. Every other organization was entirely in the cloud or was in a hybrid environment. And so I think that's evocative of what we see as well, is that we've taken a cloud centric approach for quite a long time. And nonprofit organizations, I think, benefit from the donations from Google and Office 365, among others. And I think that's really been a benefit. But I think it also means that our policy work often is not reflective of kind of the current operating environment. So I would also encourage organizations to go through that policy development process and use it as an opportunity to identify all of those IT and information systems that are in use and catalog the data that's stored in each one of them. So it's also a good opportunity to have a discussion around the device status of the organization. I think this is another thing is we found, because of COVID and the work from home and the use of cloud platforms, that many organizations have relied on personal devices, either personal computers and mobile devices, and it's been viewed as a nice benefit. And that may be okay, but it's good to talk through some of those different scenarios to see how your organization would react. So again, somebody syncs your organization's Dropbox folder to their personal home computer, and then they leave the organization. What impact would that potentially have? Same scenario could be somebody has, all the organization, your development director has their email on their personal phone, they leave the organization. What happens to all those contacts, calendar, email addresses as they leave the organization? Is that okay? Is there any concern about that data going away? Or would your organization want to have or need to have some sort of controls that say, hey, whenever you leave, we're going to wipe data from that device? Or if your device is lost or stolen, we need to have some way to prove that it can't be accessed by somebody that picked up the computer, that acquired it maliciously or by accident. And so I think that's having some of those real world cases helps to make this stuff come to life. And so I think we've all appreciated having the flexibility of these cloud-based platforms. We've all appreciated the ability to access new services, but I think at the same time it's good to ask those questions. What happens in these scenarios? What do we need to have as an organization in place to protect our data, which is our most important asset? So I think that really starts and can be included as part of the IT acceptable use policy. The next bullet on there talks about a data privacy policy. Again, one thing that I typically see is that this policy tends to be a little bit more up to date. This often comes through the web or data side of the organization. So this tends to be more up to date, and it really talks about how your organization is handling the data that you receive from your constituents, from your donors, and what are the protections and expectations that somebody would have whenever they fill out a donation form or sign up to volunteer. How is that data going to be used? What expectations can that individual have around the privacy controls of that data? So oftentimes, again, this is a separate document and would be informed by the various data systems that you're using, and could potentially also be informed by some external compliance standards. So for example, if you do need to be aware of GDPR or there's some California data privacy or New York standards, those would be applicable here or help inform those policies. So again, the data privacy policy would be a separate document that would be often developed to support those platforms where you're storing information about constituents, volunteers, other stakeholders of the organization. And then the final policy document that we think is a key element of kind of a foundation or a baseline would be the incident response plan. And again, this is a document, and it doesn't have to be very long, but it really describes what is your organization going to do when something bad happens. You know, the operative phrase in the cybersecurity world is it's not a question of if, but when, right? So it's not if you're going to get hacked, it's when you're going to get hacked. And so with that mindset, it does, I think, change the thinking. You know, we still want to prevent, we still want to have good practices in place to prevent bad things from happening. But then we also need to have thought around what are we going to do whenever that bad thing does happen. And it doesn't need to be long and sophisticated, but it should be clear in terms of who you're going to contact. You know, does your current IT provider have the capacity to respond to an incident? Do you need to have somebody else in place? Are there resources maybe that are available through your cyber liability insurance that would help support an incident response plan? What stakeholders maybe on your communications team need to be involved if you have to do a notification to your stakeholders? I think that was a challenge that many organizations that were affected by the Blackbaud breach, you know, had to scramble. You know, they had to figure out, okay, their database of 50,000 users was exposed. How are they going to communicate? What are they going to say? What do they need to say to those stakeholders? And so if you're able to at least run through some of those scenarios ahead of time, it can help you fill out those gaps. So when you do have to use it for real, there's not so much thinking on your feet. You can have a plan and work through it as opposed to really reacting in that scenario. So, so that outlines the policy controls and provides, I think, a little bit more context to those survey questions that we're asking. The next piece and element that we talk about is around training. And so I think as an IT professional who loves lots of shiny tools and lots of reporting and analytics and endpoint management, I really think that training is the key first step of investing in a technology solution. So again, making sure that your staff are aware of what's going on, are educated and equipped to respond to these cybersecurity threats, I think is a key element in protecting your organization's data and also preventing, you know, financial loss through, you know, these online fraud attempts. So we know that most of the cybersecurity threats are coming from email. And so if we can really focus our training and tools and protection around reducing those email threats, you know, then we get a lot of value out of that. So we have some training resources that are available that we've done for free that are on our YouTube channel. So there's an end user security awareness training, and there's some other resources that you can walk your staff through. You know, our best practice is to use an online training platform called KnowBe4, and this is the framework that we use in terms of the education and awareness for, you know, for a standard cybersecurity training plan. And so that plan really starts with I put quotes in here for a large annual training. And what I mean by that is not, you know, once a year, everybody goes into the conference room and you have a 1 or 2 hour presentation by somebody up front and everybody sits there and learns about it. But we use through the online training platform, typically a 15 to 20 minute training video that talks about a couple of different scenarios, different educational elements, quiz and a survey to have some interaction. And so that would be something that would be done on an annual basis or as you onboard new staff. So they would go through that, you know, training on their own time, you know, within a few days of their employment, or again, if you can do this on an annual basis for your staff. So again, an annual training that really covers some foundational concepts to give people some awareness of the most likely attacks that they're going to see, how to identify spear phishing, choosing good passwords, good security practices. Those are all common elements of that annual training. The other thing that we like to do is do test monthly phishing. So this gives you a way to measure how well you're doing. So in addition to providing the training, we also want to test and evaluate how well staff are responding to that. And so we do monthly test phishing just to see how things are going. And I have a slide a little bit later on where we can see the effectiveness of that over time. But we found that this rhythm typically works well. And then alongside of that, we're also deploying the ability for staff to report if they have a suspicious message. So again, we want to have a engaged user base that feels like they have tools and they're equipped to identify suspicious messages, and if they're not sure, they have a way to check. So again, that just sends it to our help desk team, and we can evaluate it and head off any potential issues. And then finally, we would say we want to have quarterly micro training. So we don't want cybersecurity training to be something that we do once a year and then we don't really think about it, but we want to keep it in front of people. So on a quarterly basis, then we're typically delivering a 5-minute micro training that's in the form of a game or a quiz. There's even some kind of short form, like videos, like mini series that communicate the concepts in a way that's engaging and educational as well. So we want to keep security in the front of people's minds so that they are constantly aware and vigilant. And then because we have a training system that gives us some reporting and insight, we're able to identify if there's staff that need additional assistance. So, usually there's always a handful of folks that, could use some additional training. Maybe that's one-on-one, maybe that's some additional online training. But again, we want to know where our problems are so that we're able to be proactive about that and address it ahead of time. So now that we've talked about the policy elements, we've talked about the security awareness training and staff education, I think now we kind of get to the technology controls or the tools. And so that's, there's technical pieces that we can implement at your organization to prevent those attackers from getting into your systems. And so those are broadly in 3 different categories. So the first being your identity and account management. As I mentioned earlier, anything you can log into from the web, the bad guys can too. So really focusing controls around that identity is where we want to make that initial investment. We also want to focus on data protection. So because we have that mantra of it's not a question of if you're going to get compromised, but when. So we need to have those reactive protections in place. That means things like backups. So just because you have data in a cloud-based system doesn't mean it's protected in the way that you assume it is. And so I think kind of tying this back to some of the IT acceptable use or data policies, if you as an organization say, hey, we really need to retain data for a year, then you need to make sure that you've got the technology tools in place to support that, because many cloud systems may have a 30-day data retention. So if somebody, if you have a departing staff person, they delete all their files whenever they leave the organization, and then you realize, 60 days later that you need to recover some of that information, it may not be possible unless you proactively put something in place. In the same way, if you need to be able to respond to some sort of a security incident, you need to have the security tools in place that'll allow you to do logging and reporting and analytics before that incident actually needs to be reacted to. So again, data protection is really important because we've gotten, I think, rather lax in our shift to the cloud, where we haven't needed to be as deliberate about planning around that data protection as when the server was in the hall down the office and we had the backup tapes and somebody was swapping them and taking them home and kind of being diligent. Moved to the cloud, we kind of forgot about it. But I think that's a mistake, and we need to be intentional around the protection that we have around not only the backups, also folder permissions. Maybe there's some encryption that needs to be put in place on either files or on the desktop computer, so that if, again, something is lost or stolen, you're not going to disclose information about your constituents. And then the final element here is really on the device protection. And so, the device protection really being focused on elements of updates and patching. So, if you follow us on Twitter, we tweet about, hey, have you rebooted your computer this month? It's kind of basic, but making sure that your computer is up to date with the most recent security patches is a very good security practice. It's low cost. If you're in a Microsoft world, it happens automatically. If you're in the Mac OS world, you may need to be a little bit more intentional around installing those updates, but restarting your computer allows those things to be installed completely, and then that protection is applied to your computer. The same thing goes for third-party applications. So in addition to the operating system updates, the third-party apps need to be updated as well. And then also you need to have antivirus on your computer to make sure that you've got that extra layer of protection in place. For us as a managed service provider, we have reporting to make sure that all of this stuff is happening so that we can verify that updates are installed, antivirus is up to date. And again, so unless you're able to do those things, there'll be gaps in the system. So again, those three elements of the technology piece is really around your identity and account management, data protection, and then also device protection. So if you've been hanging with me so far and you've checked everything off and you're doing great, congratulations. That's really great. I think that cybersecurity is really about fundamentals, and so once you have those fundamentals in place, then you can move into additional controls that will provide protection, an additional layer of protection for your organization. So in cybersecurity, it really is the weakest link is exploited, and so it's important to invest in the basics before spending money on tools or consulting or services that may not provide much of a return on your investment. So where we see, again, value associated with those next steps. So again, if you've already done all that stuff that we've talked about so far, that's fantastic. Once you've gone and implemented all of that, then it may be helpful for your organization to have some sort of an external assessment. And again, there can be different kinds of assessments depending on what your primary concern is. From a terminology perspective, you could get kind of a gap analysis from the policy side, where you could have an organization come in and maybe score you against those critical security controls that say, hey, this control says you need to do this. How are you meeting it? So again, that could be a policy assessment. At Community IT, we do that. We also do a technical review. We're actually logging into systems, looking at your Office 365 configuration, looking at the Google configuration. Are the backups in place? How's multi-factor implemented? Are you using modern authentication? Kind of doing a full technical review of the system. Or you may also need to do a pen test. So a pen test is kind of a specific type of security scan, where often a vendor will put an appliance on your network. They'll run some scanning to identify, are there vulnerable systems on your network? Are there open ports? Are there systems that need patched? Maybe that it's not a server, it's your network. But investing in those elements can provide some additional insight into gaps in your current deployment plan. You may want to invest in an endpoint detection and response tool. So again, antivirus is kind of table stakes. EDR is kind of the new buzzword. I think XDR is the newest acronym to be aware of, but these are higher end tools. It's what we run at Community IT that can detect not only kind of your traditional malware and viruses, but these new, what are called fileless attacks. So again, it could be like a script, it could be some PowerShell. that's running. And so this is where a lot of the adversaries are moving to, is that they're running to these fileless attacks because they're harder to detect. And so you need to have a more sophisticated tool that's able to both identify, detect, and then block these systems. And then the final piece here that may be helpful is to have more of a unified monitoring and management platform. So again, because we move things to the cloud, we have all these disparate systems. And so instead of just looking at the server to look at who's logging in and what's being accessed, now you have audit logs you need to look at. For email, maybe you have a separate file system, you have a separate CRM. All these systems have maybe different usernames and passwords to log into. And so it's hard to really get a single view of those. So there are systems that allow you to integrate the logging data from all those different tools into a central place. And so you can do some event log correlation. So you can see, oh, I see this user, they logged in, they accessed email, they logged in, they accessed CRM, and all of that's expected. Or it could also help to raise some flags and provide that analysis in a single pane of glass. So again, those unified monitoring and management tools, I think, are going to become more common. And I'm also happy to see that they're also more affordable as well. So specifically with Microsoft, that's something with their Microsoft Cloud App Security is included as part of an E5 license. And I've been very impressed with how it works and how it aggregates not only security logs from the Microsoft tools, but then also third-party applications as well. So are there any questions that have come in so far that we can answer, or we can just continue on into talking about some of the implementations and road mapping?
Yeah, excuse me. There are a few there are a few questions, but I think it makes sense to save them for the end. If you want to keep going, we can get to those questions at the end.
So I think with all this, we would be remiss to talk about implementing any change at an organization without understanding the impact that your organization's culture has on all of this. So I think understanding your organization's tolerance for risk and what needs to be protected in the context of what can be allowed is really important. And so each organization is different. The technology tools may all be the same, but how they're implemented can be vastly different. And so we have organizations that tend to be very competitive, and so they really want to know on the security awareness training, like, how many people are clicking on those messages, who is it, and so they've made it into a game. We have other organizations that are maybe a little bit more reserved, and so they want to handle that kind of thing a little bit more privately. And so the same thing goes in terms of device access. Is your organization, did you make the shift to work from home reluctantly, or were you already in a pretty good place to allow people to work remotely in terms of providing laptops and cloud access to systems? Or was it a very traditional, come into the office, work on your desktop computer, and that was the mentality? So again, I think the impact of how your organization's culture really does continue to flow into how you're protecting the organization from a cybersecurity perspective. So again, each organization needs to navigate the implementation of those controls within their own operating framework. So kind of distilling this down to, if you were to the top 3 controls on the technology side, or the assessment side, is that multi-factor authentication is the number one thing. If I talked about policy a lot, talked about the importance of it, but at the end of the day, if you only have kind of the capacity to implement one thing, it really needs to be multi-factor authentication. We see that being the biggest risk area because if an account is compromised, that has such a significant cascade of negative consequences. And so we need to really protect those digital identities and turn on multi-factor authentication. And it needs to be turned on for everything. And so if you're everything you have is in Google Workspace, great. If everything you have is in Office 365, great. But most organizations don't have all their data in just one system. So every system where you have uh, important information needs to be protected by multi-factor authentication. So the good news is that it is included with most cloud applications. So it's not, something you have to pay extra for typically. If you're, big enough, and that's, kind of could be a subjective term, but again, you could turn on some additional features through enterprise mobility and security. Now, this is on the Microsoft side to upgrade to conditional access and turn on single sign-on. So again, instead of turning on, you know, password policies and multi-factor authentication for Office 365 and Salesforce and Bamboo, you can just turn it on one time and run everybody through the Office 365 portal so that you've got one place to manage access. You have one set of passwords to deal with. You have one MFA challenge to deal with. And so that's very efficient. So multi-factor authentication should be the number one thing on your list if you haven't done that already. After that, I do think security awareness training is a very important step to take. There are lots of options out there. We've already talked about it. So again, if you're just getting started, there's lots of free resources that you can use. We have an online training available that's on our YouTube channel. I was able to partner with TechSoup and do a 101 and a 201 cybersecurity training course for them. And so those are great kind of one-offs that you can use. If you're able to, I would really encourage the investment in a security awareness training platform like KnowBe4. There's others out there. It's not that expensive, $20 a user, for the year for the license. And I think the real value is that kind of the training, but then the ongoing testing and evaluation. So again, you have a better sense of what's going on. And then the final technology tool I think that is really important to implement is around business email compromise protection. So we'll provide some additional detail later, but as I said, most threats are coming from email, and so the technology tools associated with this have needed to catch up, and so traditional spam filtering is okay against blocking unwanted messages, but it hasn't been doing a very good job in blocking these confidence scams, things with malicious links in them. And so having a dedicated tool to work on business email compromises is really, we get a lot of mileage out of that. People can ignore, the spam message in their inbox, but it's really hard for them to ignore the email that looks like it's coming from their executive director or their finance person, to click on this link, to share something. And so business email compromise protection really focuses on identifying those messages and then removing them from the inbox. So again, the other thing that we like about them, particularly the Barracuda tool that we use, is that it provides some additional alerting. So again, if an account does look like it's been compromised, it will also provide alerting on that. So again, for all those things, getting visibility into what's going on in your network is key. And so some of these tools like Barracuda Sentinel are great for blocking spear phishing messages, also raising flags if things like new mailbox rules are created, or if there's a suspicious login, and so that generates an alert, and then you're able to respond to that when you get it. So talking specifically about why MFA, we can see how effective it is. So what we're recommending for MFA, and again, another plug for our video, is that we do have an enrollment video. It's like 10 minutes long that walks you through how to turn on multi-factor authentication in your organization and using the on-device prompt. So again, multi-factor authentication is something that you know, which is your password, along with something you have, like a smartphone. And so those on-device prompts where you log in, your phone buzzes from the Authenticator app, is 100% effective against those automated bot attacks. So that's the best method that we recommend implementing whenever you're going to make this change. You want to get people on, you want people to use the platform in the right way. So multi-factor authentication is extremely effective. And then cybersecurity awareness training is also extremely effective. So this is some information from the vendor that we use in terms of know before. And these are real numbers, and these are real numbers that we see. Whenever we do baseline phishing tests for a new organization, we will see up to 40% of people clicking on links and emails. I mean, it's unbelievable. You would be surprised what people click on. But the good news is that after that initial baseline, and you do that major training, and maybe after you do quarterly trainings, the click through rate really does decline and decline significantly. Now, what we've seen is that it typically never ever goes away. Somebody always clicks on something because they're curious. But going from 40% of your staff clicking on things to 4% is a really good return. And so this is data that was taken from KnowBe4, and they did an industry benchmarking study across 4 million users, 17,000 organizations. And so this is the data that they came up with. And this is something that we echo their experience in terms of very high initial click rates and then significantly reduced click rates after training. So again, training needs to be ongoing, needs to be consistent. And then we also have the note here, some supporting information around how business email compromise works. And so this is a graphic from the FBI, where they are very concerned about this because of the financial impact. So again, we can see this as well. These confidence-based schemes that start via email can be very expensive to organizations, and they're very difficult to defend against because there's often not much content in the messages, so spam filters are often not able to catch it. And so we're reliant on either really sophisticated tools to try to block it, or staff being able to identify that it's malicious or something is off, and then also having good processes in place for organizations, if and when they need to change payment information. So again, business email compromise is a significant threat, and having a technology tool in place to help prevent it provides a lot of protection. So as we transition from this kind of laundry list of things to do, and maybe you already know that you need to do that, I think it's really important to engage the organization's leadership and impress on them that all organizations are vulnerable. So again, hacking isn't something that just happens to the big organizations with big IT teams. This is something that happens to organizations no matter what their size. So, and that poor cybersecurity is an organizational liability. And so we have seen that where if your organization has not implemented multi-factor authentication, you are very likely going to have an account compromise. So, the data that we saw from last year, 96% of the account compromise tickets that we responded to were for staff that had not implemented MFA. And so it's really stark whenever we see those numbers that, if you have multi-factor authentication, you're in good shape. It's very unlikely you'll get compromised. If you don't have multi-factor authentication in place, then it's very likely that your account would be compromised, or maybe not yours, but somebody at your organization's. And I think finally, it does require leadership to say yes. And so for these changes, these are organizational changes. And so for multi-factor to be effective, for security awareness training to be effective, somebody at the executive level needs to say, this is important. We're making it a priority. We're going to devote time at our staff meeting for this. It can't be, IT pushing it through because it's not going to get the adoption that it needs to. So the organization's leadership really needs to identify this as a priority and include it, kind of at that all staff level. It could be driven from the bottom up. I mean, IT can certainly initiate it and it be successful. We've also seen it come from the top down. The board says this needs to happen, and then it occurs that way. So again, there's not necessarily one right way to do it, but the key factor of success is really for leadership to make it a priority. And in terms of how do you do that, again, your organizational culture really comes into this a lot. I would say you need to schedule time for security. It needs to be part of your regular rhythm. So it's not an afterthought. It could be, monthly reporting that you're going to, go do with your executive team. It could be quarterly planning with your IT partner to identify what do we need to focus on, what are the threats that we're seeing, how's the security awareness training going. In terms of how that gets communicated, I really think it comes back to knowing your audience. What is the most effective? Is it a narrative? Is it stories? Hey, this other organization that we work with, they got hacked, and here's why they got hacked, and here's why we need to make this change. Or are they more impressed by metrics and numbers? Is it hey, it's going to cost us $6,000 more for our cyber liability insurance because we haven't implemented MFA. How are we going to address that? A breach is going to cost $150,000 once we get through. How are we going to address that? And then I think it's also an opportunity to leverage existing compliance requirements to do some of these things. As an organization, if you are receiving any sort of donation, then PCI compliance would be applicable here. If you're a healthcare provider, then HIPAA would be appropriate. If you're dealing with European data subjects, then GDPR may drive some of that compliance as well. So again, understanding those external factors can help get some additional traction to implement these initiatives. So in terms of next steps, if you haven't taken the assessment survey, I would encourage you to go ahead and do that and review those results. You'll get a little email with the questions and then your responses, so you can use that, print it out, check it off of what you need to focus on. And I would say prioritize one control to implement. It can be really daunting to get these assessment reports where it seems like there's so much work to be done, but you just need to take a bite, take a step. And so pick one new control to implement. If you haven't implemented multi-factor authentication already, make that the first step. If you've already implemented MFA, but maybe you haven't done training, maybe go ahead and start with a training plan. So again, pick a control, implement it, and then you got to really plan. Again, get time on the all staff meeting to say, this is a priority. We're going to talk about multi-factor authentication, or we're going to talk about security awareness training. So really make it intentional, and then you'll be able to execute and get through those roadmaps. So great. Well, I think we have a couple minutes here for questions, and so I'll be happy to respond to anything that's kind of popped up throughout this presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. That was fantastic. Great summary and overview of cybersecurity, which I've been thinking about for a long time and have heard about many times, but I feel like I always learn something new in these presentations. We do have a few questions. If you do have any questions, please you can chat them in or use the Q&A utility to ask your question. So if money is no object, what does best-in-class protection look like? What are some specific examples you can provide? What would you suggest? Someone who's got a blank check to write on security protection, what should they do?
Yeah, well, I think once you get the policy work done, I think, and out of the way, I would really make sure that you've got good tools in place. I think on the device protection side. So again, for us, community IT, and I think we work really hard to get best in class. We may not have a complete blank check, but we invest a lot in our security. And so for us, that means we're doing all managed devices. So again, staff have managed computers. We're doing client-side encryption. We have SentinelOne Complete, which is a high-end EDR tool in place on our systems. And then all of that information feeds up into our managed cloud app security portal. So again, we have alerting and management and monitoring that comes from the tools that we use. We've been really intentional around any privileged system that we have access to, includes multi-factor authentication. Most of that is driven through our single sign-on portal. We happen to use Microsoft's enterprise applications, which is included in Office 365. but we've also supported organizations that use Okta or OneLogin. So again, there may be some reasons to invest in that. And then again, investing in training and education and awareness for your staff is important. And then I think the final piece, once you've got again the policy, the device protections, backups of those critical systems, server failover, all of those things in place, which we do. Then you can start looking at those external assessments where you can get a third party view because even as you have really invested a lot in those internal controls, it's likely that you've missed some things. And so getting somebody to look at that system with fresh eyes and investing in gap analysis or a technical assessment or even a pen test can be really helpful to get that view. So again, we use a laundry list of technologies at Community IT. So we're all in Barracuda, kind of all of their cloud protections, spam filtering, spear phishing, backups, the SentinelOne tools, the Microsoft suite. We've got a lot of protections in place, and I think that gives us the insight and reporting that we need, given the level of work that we do.
Great, thank you, Matt. We have another question from an organization that that relies on volunteers. These volunteers are spread out throughout the country. They're using their own personal laptops to do the work. What sorts of protections might you recommend for them? And maybe more importantly, any suggestions for how to train those volunteers on cybersecurity?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it'd be important to implement those security controls in terms of the systems that they can access. So again, some of those data protection policies in terms of what we call like least privileged access. So again, make sure that you've got volunteers that only have access to the information they need to do their job. So again, that may mean if you're collecting information about various constituents, volunteers are using that information. Maybe the volunteer, they don't need to know their birth date or they don't need to know their address to deliver service, and so you could make that restricted. And so the volunteer has their name, maybe their phone number as a way to identify somebody, but they don't have access to additional personally identifiable information. So again, understanding what information people need to do their work and then only providing that level of information would be, I think, an important step. Again, depending on the type of data you have, if you're just delivering all of that through a web browser, then you can put in some controls, so that they maybe can't export data or there's limited opportunities for them to download something on a personal device that you don't control would be good. And then I don't think it would necessarily be out of line to expect volunteers to go through some basic training on good cybersecurity practices, particularly if it involves creating an email account at your organization for them. And I think this is one area where we see organizations get a little bit casual and saying, oh well, this person only is a volunteer, or we just need to create an email account from them. But I think recognizing that any account that can be logged into from the web is potentially vulnerable. And again, if it is associated with your organization's domain, that email address is potentially valuable because it could be used then to target other people. And I think that's the real risk. So again, only provide people access to the information that they need. If you can, turn on multi-factor authentication for those systems, particularly if they have sensitive information, and then have consistent policies and follow through, I think would be important steps to take.
Great, thank you, Matt. Well, I think we have just about reached our time limit for today's webinar. We do want to let you know about next month's webinar. We're not going to be talking about cybersecurity. I know we've done a lot of that this year, and we wanted to finish strong this month since October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And next month, we are going to be talking about best practices for Mac support. We know that many of you probably use Macs or have staff that use Apple Mac computers. We manage over 600 Macs, It's probably 10% of our install base. It's a significant number. And those of you who use Macs or manage Macs know that they're a little bit different and they require a special approach. It can be done well. It is possible to use Macs on an enterprise basis. And we're going to be going into a pretty deep dive in November to go over that, provide you with some tips and tricks on things you can do to manage your Macs. So I'm very excited about it. I'm looking forward to attending that webinar. And that will be Wednesday, November 17th, right before the holidays at 3 o'clock. So keep an eye out for that announcement, and we encourage you to register for that webinar. Thank you very much for your time today. We will be sending you an email with a summary of all the resource links that we chatted out today, as well as a link to the recording of today's webinar. Wish you all a great afternoon and a pleasant rest of the week. Thank you.